A number of changes were made to the interface for Aperture version 3.3, and the most obvious change that you'll notice is that the icons are entirely grayscale now. Where before we used to have color buttons across the top of the screen, and more significantly, color icons down the side in the library, those have all now been converted to grayscale. The change may be a bit distracting at first, because you're used to looking for various colors to identify things like projects, albums, smart albums, and so on. However, over time, you'll probably find that the monochromatic interface is actually less distracting because it doesn't take away from the image that you're looking at. Remember, when it comes to working with your photography, you don't want to be distracted by other garish colors hanging out on the side of the screen that have nothing to do with your photos. So, again, it may take a little bit of getting used to, but over time I think you'll agree that the monochromatic interface is a bit more professional looking. And in fact, if you go back to an older version of Aperture, you'll find it looking almost cartoonish and too playful. Let's start with a tour of the Library tab. Underneath this, you'll see a variety of collections that aren't exactly the same as what you saw before. The first thing I want to point out is that even though there's no obvious way to collapse any one of these collections, as you hover your mouse near the title, you'll see a Hide button showing up on the right of it. When you tap that, that section will collapse, and as you can see, the button changes from Hide to Show. As you move your mouse away, the button disappears, and as you bring it back, it comes back again. So you have a variety of collections here. The first one is for your projects, photos, faces, and places, and you'll see the name of your current Aperture library at the top. This is very helpful if you're used to switching between multiple libraries, because now at a glance you can see exactly what library you're working in. Underneath that you have the Recent collection, the Web collection, your Projects collection, and the Albums collection. As you can see, by collapsing all of them, you really free up the interface, and it looks much cleaner. So now you can focus on exactly what you're working on. Let's start from the bottom and work our way up. Albums is a new collection that shows any orphaned albums that you may have in your project. Let's open up Projects again, and I'll select a project in here. How about this one, Wild Safari? And I'll create an album just like we always did before. So New, Album, and we'll call this Lion. When I create that, just as before, the album is created as part of that project. And that's what you would expect. However, now when you create albums that don't belong to any particular project, you have a place to put them. You can go ahead and drag this in manually if you want to, like so, or by clicking elsewhere in the interface. For example, up here at the top where there's nothing to click on, everything will be deselected, and now when you create a new album, it will automatically be created in that album's collection. We could call this something like Year's Best. Tap OK, and as you can see, that album has now been created under the new Album section. But again, of course, you can always rearrange these, and if you accidentally create an album here, you can go ahead and drag that to wherever you'd like. There aren't any other changes under the Project section, so let's move up to the next one, which is Web. Web shows you your photo stream, your Flickr collections, and also your Facebook collection if you've linked that here. You'll see all of your online collections in one place, and you'll notice that the overall look has changed as well. We'll explore this more in the sharing section of this training. Up above Web, you'll see one called Recent. This is another new category. Recent shows you your most recent project, the one that you were last working on, as well as a collection of your last 12 months. However, this can be changed in your preferences. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Underneath that, you'll see your last import, your flagged, any rejected images, and anything that you have in the trash. The album that says last 12 months, as I mentioned, can be customized. If you go to the Preferences, under the General tab, you'll see that you have the option, first of all, to completely disable this album. If I turn that off, you'll see it disappears from the recent list. If I turn that back on, I can now change this to go anywhere from 1 all the way up to 18. You can tap on the arrow, you can click in it and type in the number that you like, or you can simply click and drag on the number itself and quickly drag back and forth between 1 to 18. I'll go ahead and set this to 1, so this way I'm only looking at the last month's worth of photos at one glance. Let's scroll up to the top to see one more change in the library list view. If you tap on Projects, you'll see all of your projects organized in this nice large thumbnail view. And as before, you could rearrange those by name, by date, showing oldest or newest first, but you'll see a new category here called Manual. When you switch it to Manual, you now have the ability to rearrange these manually however you like. And of course, if you change your mind, you can go up here at any time and rearrange them by name or date or however you like. To the right of the Library tab is the new Info tab. This used to be called Metadata, and really nothing else in here has changed, except that the name is now Info. The reason for the name change is quite simple. The information that we're seeing here isn't just metadata. We can see a lot more about the image that wouldn't really be called metadata. For example, if we've shared the image on Facebook, you'll see that listing here, and any comments that have been applied to it would show up here as well. This may not be considered metadata, so instead of adding it here under Metadata tab, the tab has been renamed to Info, showing you all kinds of information about your picture. The last tab is Adjustments, and there have been quite a few changes in here, and we'll go through those throughout this video. One of the first changes I want to point out, however, is a rename to one of these drop-down menus. This one here is called Effects, and this used to be called Presets. And in fact, Presets used to be sitting here. So these two buttons have swapped places, and again, Presets has been renamed Effects. If you want to install any effects or any presets that you purchase, you can do that by clicking on Effects, and then choosing Edit Effects, and then tapping on the gear menu to import. Everything works the same here. It's simply that the category has been renamed. To the right of this, you'll notice a magic wand icon. That is the Auto Enhance tool, and we'll talk about that later in this video as well. You may have noticed that there is a gear icon missing from here that was in the previous versions. That gear has now moved down to the bottom of the screen. If you tap on the gear menu, you'll see a variety of controls over your histogram and color value options for when you're working with color. You can also do things like hide the camera and color info, or revert to the original image from here. However, when it comes to reverting to the original image, you'll also notice that there's a big New button on the left that allows you to very quickly and easily revert to the original image. Finally, back to the gear menu, while you do have histogram options here, it may seem a little bit odd to have this gear menu so far away from the histogram itself. So, if you right-click on the histogram itself, you'll see that you can immediately access all of those histogram options from here. The last change that I want to show you here is a new preference. I'm going to go ahead and switch this to split view, and then under the Aperture menu, open the Preferences, and switch to Appearance. Previously, you had Viewer Brightness and Browser Brightness. That controls the background color behind your viewer and your browser. The viewer by default is set to 18%, for a standard photographic 18% gray, but you can change that to whatever you like. Personally, I like leaving it at 18%. The browser brightness can be changed as well. By default it's 33%, but you can change that to whatever you like. Neither of those are new. However, you may have noticed that there are two new sliders in here that weren't there before. There's Full Screen Viewer and Full Screen Browser Brightness. To go into full screen mode, click on the double-headed arrow in the top right corner, or tap on the F key. As you can see, we now have control over the viewer brightness and the browser brightness. By default it's set to 0% for black, but I can change that to whatever I like. If you want to preview changing the browser brightness while you're in full screen mode, just go ahead and tap on the image, then tap on the V key to swap views, and then hit Command, to bring up the appearance preferences again. Now you can change the browser brightness just as easily. When you're ready to exit the full screen mode, the easiest way to do that is to simply tap the Escape key on your keyboard. As you can see, there's been a number of interface changes to Aperture 3.3 and above. Some of them you may find a little disconcerting, and may take you a few moments to get around them, but once you get used to the new interface, I think you'll find that you'll be working in Aperture faster than ever before.